I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by a forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs. And we were worried one of us might go too far into the woods and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion. My mom loved the house itself. And my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they had been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it. And when one of us went in, they would pace around anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we would notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing to be scared about, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest. Twigs crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response. But if we shined the flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse, for just a split second, of something that we could swear looked like a person. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out the side of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond. She remembers looking out of her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground and was a little too tall to be a person, and was sort of distorted, and she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase him off, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. My parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks and stopped bothering even opening the door. Until one rainy night, when the knocking was persistent and agitated, my mom pointed out that there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside. But when she opened the door, not only there was no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him before he made it to the forest. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother wanted to see the footage because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking. I guess thinking it would look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something, and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening, my dad was in the backyard and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she had gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he came back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest. So when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later, while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't even question it, despite the fact I had seen my mom inside recently, and I hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she had gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come and help her. As I walked in, the dog started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside, and I needed to run back home as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents built a fence around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We would hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every single window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence, and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got worse and more frequent, and one night my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking. When he woke up, standing at the fence, staring into the forest with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors, and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being open that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all just get exercised, you know, just in case. Just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I am. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there in the forest. But I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. So I saw this about 4 years ago at work, and it creeped me the fuck out. I work for a digital surveillance company that runs the eye in the sky for thousands of restaurants, bars, and gas stations across the US. From time to time, we get calls for investigations to look into robberies, thefts, etc. One day we get a call from a popular fast food chain located in the heart of Detroit. They say an employee OD'd by the dumpster, and they needed us to get some answers on the situation. First, basically what happened, and how long he was there. The next question is where it starts to get weird. See, the dumpster had a brick wall around it. It had 2 entryways to the dumpster. A gate you had to pass when you walked out the back door. And the big gates where the garbage truck has access to the dumpster to empty it out. They claimed those big gates were always open, and the small gate by the back door was locked from the inside. Nobody ever used that small gate. The weird thing was, when the body was found, an employee walked out. That gate that was never open was indeed open, and the body was there on full display. So the next question: who the fuck opened that gate? So we download the footage. One night, the employee goes outside, throws out the trash, and you kinda see him through the locked door that was never open. The way the camera was angled, you could see over the top also. He injects himself, slumps over, and keels over, dead behind the dumpster. He was out there for 2.5 days. No employees ever come to look for him. It's pouring rain both days. For 2 days, employees come and go, taking out the trash and not seeing him. Then, on the 3rd day, in the morning sunshine, clear as fucking day, the gate just slowly opens by itself. Nobody comes, nobody goes. The gate just opens by itself, and the body is sitting there in the same position it was 2 days earlier. I literally felt chills down my spine. To this day, I can't explain it without thinking it was paranormal. Anyway, a couple of hours later, an employee walks out with a trash bag, sees the body, freaks out, and calls the police. I didn't write it, but we basically had to write a report on how a gate apparently opened itself. I used to work at a convenience store. I started working there in the 90s. Shortly before that, the owner's son was working, and a man rushed in to ask for a knife. He had been in an accident, and his girlfriend couldn't get her seatbelt off. The owner's son turned around to grab a knife, and by the time he had turned back, the dude was dead on the floor. His seatbelt had done something to his esophagus, crushed it, I believe. And while the adrenaline helped, he suffocated and died right there at the register. I did not know when I started working there. I found out after I asked about the things I was experiencing. I would get kicked or poked in the leg or shoulder while nobody was behind me. I would walk through cold patches that moved throughout the store. See the reflection of someone in the cooler door, but turned to see nobody there. Felt like I was being watched while I was in the cooler filling sodas. But the knife, the bagel knife, while working by myself on camera with nobody else there. The knife would be gone the minute I turned around, and then find it a bit later, maybe somewhere else. The other staff said similar things were happening to them. When night shift was one person, and often the store was empty. The people who worked that shift heard whistling sometimes, but mostly they heard crying. Turns out the girlfriend was a teacher at my high school. I started talking to him while I worked. I let him know that she was okay, that his girlfriend survived, and he can let go. And things started to calm down. I stopped getting poked. The knife stayed where I left it. Definitely the most intense experience I've ever had. One weekend, I was at my dad's house. He would come to the upstairs bathroom to get a shave and heard footsteps in my stepsister's room. I thought it was him walking around initially, so I got up to find him standing at a closed door. He looks back at me and whispers, "You can hear that too, right?" I nodded, and he opened the door slowly. My stepsister was asleep and never had been awake, apparently. There's no way she could have crossed the room, gotten in bed, and pretended to be that convincingly asleep in the 2 seconds it took my dad to open the door. He went in, checked her TV, which had never been on. He had one of those big ones from the 90s that would get warm when turned on. The radio hadn't been turned on either. After that, he heard the footsteps a bunch of times, usually very early in the morning. Some of the footsteps were heavy. They would shake the ceiling fan of the dining room directly under her bedroom, and they had woken her up a few times as well. Whenever I would shower at my dad's house, I always felt like someone was standing behind me. Eventually, I got so stressed out and paranoid that I refused to shower at the house or even go into the upstairs bathroom. My dad asked me one day, "Do you ever feel like someone's in the shower with you when you're in there?" After months of me feeling that way and never mentioning it to anyone. I went with my best friend during high school for summer vacation to his grandparents' house, who live in the countryside in Japan. I stayed in his mom's old room, which has a small wall closet. Just above this closet was a smaller closet door, like a foot and a half tall, about 3 feet wide, just above it. Weird design, but their house is old. The first couple of weeks I was pretty jet lagged, and Japan is hot and humid, so I didn't really sleep peacefully at night. If my light was off at night though, I always felt uneasy about that small closet space. Something about it just felt darker than the rest of the room. Towards the end of the second week, I started to adjust to the time difference. One morning, I woke up, and that small door was open. It was unsettling, but I closed it, and just thought maybe it wasn't closed all the way, and came loose. A couple of nights later, I woke up feeling uneasy. It was dark, and I could see that small door was open. It was much, much darker than the rest of the room. Like black, pitch dark. This was the first and only time I experienced paralysis. I was too scared to move, say, or do anything. I just felt this darkness coming from there. I don't remember sleeping that night, but I must have, because I remember waking up the next morning. I told my friend about it, who said his mom told him about something like that too. When we got back home, and I talked to his mom kinda joked with me. "So, I heard you met the ghost too." Locational context. I live on a farm on the side of a mountain in the middle of nowhere in British Columbia's interior. No cell service, neighbors are beyond shouting distance. A very on your own lifestyle out here. My trailer is at the top of this property next to a barn, surrounded by a forest, except for the little road up here. The mountain, Mount Ida, has a long history with the Aboriginal people of my area. I've been told stories of the mountain since I was a kid. Basically, the summary of every story is people are banished from the mountain because the spirits make it too dangerous. All sorts of weird things have been seen and have happened on this mountain. Late night, around 10:45 p.m., I heard 3 sets of sirens rush by the road. Out here, you never hear sirens. In my 15 years here, I've heard 1 siren, and it was earlier this week. Basically, it just intrigued me. Wasn't until about half an hour later or so, my power cuts out. I'm already in bed at this point. Lights were out. Only way I actually noticed was because I had no Wi-Fi. Now that's always a heart stopper. Because out here, no Wi-Fi means I'm entirely on my own. This makes me anxious for sure, but I'm more worried that I won't be able to call the fire department if something catches on fire. Then out of nowhere, I hear this super sharp and loud cry, like a kid who just crashed a bike. Hysterical crying, what sounds to be a young child. My dogs are going absolutely nuts at the door. Now, if you're familiar with cougars, you should know that they can often mimic a child crying, and scarily accurate too. So laying there, as the tension builds, I'm just telling myself it's a cougar. And that's all it is, just a cougar. For me, and that's the best case scenario right now, that it's just a cougar. Dogs have finally calmed down now, and I'm still just trying to get some shut-eye when I hear the second sound. This was an ungodly sound that I've never heard in my life. This one sounded like a mix of every horror movie monster, all in one. I can't even describe it. It was about 5 seconds of pure screeching, like a demonic banshee, with the vocal cords of a T-Rex. It was as if there was a concert-sized sound system hiding in the forest, blasting zombie vomit or something. I could taste my heartbeat at this point. My dogs are acting like rabies-ridden pit bulls towards the door, snarling and growling like whatever just screamed was on the other side of the door. I didn't know what to do at that point. Couldn't call or get in contact with anyone. The lights are all off. I'm just sitting there in the dark, utterly and completely scared. I was not able to get up and go investigate. It's the middle of winter too. I just laid there, checking my phone every 30 seconds, seeing if the Wi-Fi came back. Nothing else came after though. Just ended up falling asleep at some point. As of this morning, everything is back to normal. Nothing creepy going on. Power's back on. Made a post in a local Facebook group. Nobody else in the area heard anything. And only a few lost power as well. So take it as you will. Cougar in heat. Bigfoot coming out of hibernation. 1,000-year-old native ghost trying to get me off his land. I'm not a paranormal guy, and I have no idea what it could be at this point. I've been mourning the loss of my wife for 2 years. Back in the day, when she was alive, we promised to haunt each other should one or the other leave this life. We both firmly believe in an afterlife and spirits. So this wasn't just a silly joking promise. Even if there was some teasing about how we would do it to each other. I actually think we only said it twice. Well, it had been 2 years since she had left. I recall being in the room when she died. The machines were breathing for her, and I felt her leave her body. Just gone, with the sound of the machines still going. A few hours later, they were officially turned off. A little backstory. My late wife had an eating disorder, and this disorder destroyed a lot of her gut and organs. It was a slow and painful death. When I say I felt relief, it was like a bullet. In life, I didn't yell. Rarely argued. And when we did, it was a healthy discourse. And decisions were made to settle it. I knew where ED had caused these problems. But what I didn't know was how much worse it really was. I found the information on her phone post-death. She knew dying was the final outcome years before I knew, and held back the information from me, letting me talk about growing old together. In short, I haven't seen her. Fast forward 2 years, and I'm thinking of her, alone in my kitchen. I was overcome with intense grief, and for the first time, I got enraged. I shouted, and I still regret it. I shouted, "You did this to yourself, and I'm the one living with it. I hate what you've done to me." I said those exact words. Immediately in my brain, from year to year, I heard her voice shout back, "It's about damn time." I felt 1,000 moving tingles going on inside my head. Needless to say, I cried the hardest I had ever done in 2 years since her passing. Black-eyed kids. My grandma encountered 3 of them. They asked her if they can come in. They didn't look exactly at her. They stared at the floor. One of them asked if they can use our phone to call their parents. And my grandma told me she never felt such dread, but thought nothing of it because they were kids. She said yes and let them in. She told me that they finally looked at her when she invited them in, but eyes that were so black. She never saw something like this ever in her life. She froze and just watched them walk into our hallway, out of sight. And my grandma followed after a second or 2. And they were gone. Simply vanished into thin air. She was genuinely scared and confused when she told me this. My grandmother would never make such things up or talk about the paranormal in general, let alone having access to the internet, because she doesn't simply understand how this all works. Never used a computer in her life. She's a Turkish grandma from an old generation. I googled and froze after reading about this phenomena. This happened 7 years ago. This story is startling me every time I think about it. My poor grandma. She's just terrified. Last night, I couldn't sleep at all, which is fairly normal since I work the graveyard shift, and it's pretty much turned me into a night owl. So even on my days off, I'm usually up all night. So I'm up in my bed, watching a rom-com, laughing, and in a great mood, and decided that I deserve to treat myself to the occasional drink. My bar is in my basement, which is fully finished and furnished. It was pretty much a man cave. I've spent entire nights down there by myself or with the gang, and nothing strange has ever happened. So anything creepy or weird down there was absolutely the furthest thing from my mind. I finished laughing my butt off and head down there. I go behind the bar, pour myself a drink, and head upstairs. Right as I'm leaving, I hear someone saying, "Hey," coming from downstairs in the middle of the basement. It was an older man's voice, in their 50s or around that. I know the house is empty, except for me, and it scared the absolute shit out of me. I looked down there, and nothing moved. No one spoke or came forward. I freaked out. I ran upstairs and slammed the basement door closed. I'm wondering, did I imagine that? Is there someone in my house? As I stand there panicking, I hear the same man's voice coming from down in the basement, but muffled by the door. I think he asked a question, then continued to talk right after. He was talking to me. The question sounded something like, "Where are you going?" I couldn't make out much, especially what he said after. But I was panicked, adrenaline pumping, and I just went into fight or flight mode, thinking someone broke into my house. I ran into the next room, grabbed my flashlight, my baseball bat, and then headed back down there. Silence. Just silence. I turned on every light in the room down there, ready to bash in some home intruder's head. But nothing. Every corner checked, and the basement is completely empty, except for me. I knocked the fuck out of there, locked myself in the bedroom, and spent the next hour in crisis mode, checking my basement cameras, which showed nothing, and no one, except for me pouring myself a drink, and then coming back down there, running around like a madman. I went down to the basement this afternoon after I woke up, bat still in hand, and rechecked the whole place. I found nothing. No one. Just me questioning both my sanity and reality. I know what I heard. That guy was pretty loud, and he was talking in my direction and at me. Even through the door, I heard him talking. It seemed like he was trying to have a conversation with me. I've never had any kind of break-ins or any other kind of strange experience down there in my 15 years here. Does stuff like this happen to people out of the blue? Or am I finally losing my ever-loving mind? I don't know what to do now.